Hello and welcome to the Suzanne Atwell Show. In this episode, COVID and schools. A story about crisis management, innovative solutions, and dedication to the safety and education of our most valuable asset, our children. A year after the pandemic began and 6 months since Florida schools were ordered back to class, we talked to Jody Dumas, COO and Assistant Superintendent of Sarasota County Schools, Pat Gardner, President of the Sarasota Classified Teachers Association, Shirley Brown, Chair, Sarasota County School Board, and Erica Franz, veteran teacher and hero from the front lines of the classroom. March 2020, Florida Department of Education Commissioner Richard Corcoran urges schools to close. Sarasota and Manatee County comply. It started as an extended spring break, but soon became a permanent necessity as the virus spread. Teachers, administrators, and school boards scrambled to salvage the year via at-home and virtual alternatives. As summer passed, school districts, teachers' unions, and the parents across the country debated back-to-school plans. By July, Florida Governor DeSantis had heard enough and issued a sweeping, controversial order. On July 6th, the governor declared a state of emergency and ordered all public and charter schools back to class 5 days a week starting August 10th. Sarasota County School Board voted unanimously to delay the start by 1 week, but on August 31st, threatened by a loss of $86 million, students returned to class. That was 6 months ago. 43,600 strong from K through 12, the class of 2021, masked, distanced, and back to school. Welcome, Jody.
Well, thank you.
Please tell us, in Sarasota County School District, what are your policies on mask wearing, social distancing? What if someone doesn't want to wear a mask? Are there penalties for that? What's your plan?
So our plan really started developing last year, certainly at the start of COVID. As a school district, these were areas that we've never been involved in terms of trying to develop a mask policy at school and social distance, all new to us. Mm-hmm. So we really had to walk the line and think about what really made sense for us in Sarasota County schools. And where we ended up with that was masks were mandatory throughout all of our facilities. And if you could not wear a mask, there had to be a waiver that was granted, and you had to get a medical waiver to get there. And so there are really two medical waivers that you can get from a doctor. One is from a mask to a face shield. Mm-hmm. Is kind of like a first level waiver. If you can wear a shield, that's the next best thing. And then if for some medical condition you can't wear anything, that's another medical waiver that'll allow you not to wear anything.
How did that work out?
It worked out really wonderfully. We were nervous about that. And certainly, as families kind of digested that, there were a lot of different viewpoints. Do I want to send my kid back to school with a mask, or do I not want to? And I'll tell you what, the families have really worked with us throughout the district to make sure that there is compliance. Mm-hmm. And we had, even at the start, we had very few students who weren't complying with that policy. Certainly there had to be some education in terms of why we were doing these types of things, but really parents stepped up and worked with us because I think they really knew at the end of the day, it was all about just making sure kids and staff were safe in our schools.
If a parent or another member of student, their household tests positive, what's the protocol?
So what happens is we have a whole reporting system that's electronic that gets set up that if a parent calls in or a student reports that, hey, I've been exposed or I am positive, that starts the process. It comes in through an electronic form from the school site to our contact tracers in the district with the person's name. We then start our internal contact tracing process, which is, let's take a look at all the class rosters, who was in school on these days, what did the lunchroom look like, what did the school bus look like. It becomes very, very complicated very quickly. So it's a lot of work. At typical high school, you got kids in 7 different classes throughout the day, potentially riding a bus, potentially in sports programs. So when you get a positive or exposure on campus, there's a lot of work that goes into tracing. The guidelines we've put in place, again, really set forth by our health department are, we look at a 6-foot distance around that particular individual is what our guidelines are. Whether there's a mask involved or PPE, it does not matter. If we have a person that's been, what we call it a critical exposure, been within 6 foot of the person who's positive for more than 15 minutes, and that's cumulative in a 24-hour period, then that other individual is potentially exposed and will be quarantined from our school site. So what we have happen is, let's take a high school. We have somebody who's positive, it gets reported. We then go to every teacher, and they have seating charts that they've developed this year that they send to us, and they mark off. We actually take tape measures into classrooms and say, how far are these two students apart? Everything gets measured. We identify a list of students from classes, potentially from the bus, from sports programs, of people who need to be quarantined. That information then all goes to the health department contact tracers. They verify all the information we're giving them, and they officially come back and say, these 25, 30, 10 kids, whatever it is, need to be quarantined. Then goes back to the school site, the administrators at the school site who are working tremendous hours trying to get this done. They then have to call parents, explain what's going on, what the exposure looked like, and give their student a return date. And so right now it's a 10-day window, so if you're exposed, you're 10 days from that exposure when you can come back. We are not seeing, in fact, we're seeing very little of exposures happening in schools where we're getting a positive out of a school exposure. Really what we're seeing is calls from families saying, hey, Jody, a student in your class was with his grandfather this weekend, and his grandfather tested positive. Then we've got Jody as a potential that gets quarantined. So we're not seeing a lot of transmission in schools. What we're seeing is it's happening in the community, and because we're part of the community, that's then coming into the school site and forcing the quarantine.
So what have been the largest capital and physical plant investments to date? And what are items at the top of your wish list? And will it require additional funds as we move forward? I'm going to go into infrastructure on meeting critical needs of this COVID.
Sure. So, in terms of our funding, whether it's infrastructure or general fund, so we got capital funds, building funds, right, capital investments, and then we've got general operating fund. And I'm going to talk more generally because it hasn't been a lot of capital funding that we've needed. It's been a lot of funding, the tune of about $13 million this year of additional funding, and that's non-budgeted dollars, right? Those are things we just had to come up with. But let me jump back to kind of buildings. A lot of the talk that you're hearing throughout the United States is investments in AC systems, right, to bring in fresh air and flush buildings and things. I will tell you that our community, given the foresight of our board over the last, say, 18, 20 years, they have invested a lot of capital dollars in capital asset maintenance. And so what that means is we really focus in our buildings, and when our systems are becoming antiquated, we replace those systems. And so whether you're talking an older building like a Bay Haven, or whether you're talking a brand new building like really an STC that's only 4, 5, 6 years old now, I think, all of those systems in those schools have been updated. And the key to a COVID environment with your AC system is flushing the internal spaces. You're bringing in outside air. We are compliant in every school right now. So it's not like we have to change out AC systems so that we're flushing buildings. We are flushing them now. We had that capability from the start. We had to adjust our outside air intake and up it, which we had that capability in all of our school sites, so all of that was done. So we are constantly, every hour on the hour, whatever space you're in the school district, we are flushing that entire space several times with outside air. So in terms of dollars, not a lot of capital investment, but certainly general operational dollars in terms of our energy bill is going to be higher this year than it has been in years. I will say with our AC systems, the one thing that we did have to upgrade was our level of filtration. That's a COVID level filter in every AC system in the district, in every classroom, but that's an $800,000 bill versus a $200,000 bill. So as you can see, with our budget, there's been a lot of impact in terms of raising costs that we just did not budget for, and we're having to figure out how all that works.
Wow. I want to talk about missing students. How has that changed over the past year? Where do these students go? Have some gone to private schools? Have they? They're going with homeschooling? What about homeless kids? Don't we still have a number of homeless kids in our county? What is happening? We used to call it truancy. I don't know if they use that word, truant, because you go to the dynamic of the family. Here we go back down to the family and what their needs are.
Enrollment has been a challenge this year, absolutely. And so when we opened school in August, who was going to show up? And so we were certainly down. Across the district, we were down about 1,200 students. And so, where are they going? And what we saw is some went into our virtual programs. Some went into a Florida virtual program. Some stayed homeschool. And some, like kindergarten, just didn't show up. And we're not sure if they're just staying out a year and going to show up next year in kindergarten. Will they show up next year in first grade? That's kind of a question a little bit. Finding kids this year has not only been about they're not even showing up, it's been about them being remote and maybe not logging in all the time, and how do we get them back to a full-time environment.
How do you have trouble thinking the federal dollars if you can't meet the FTE,
Absolutely.
full-time enrollment criteria for the state? Are you going to lose federal dollars?
That's absolutely one of the big questions we had most of the year. You know, recently the state just came out and said for this year they're going to hold us harmless, which for all school districts is absolutely the right thing to do. I mean, that had to be done because we did not cut services this year. I mean, we have our buses running, we have food service, and we've got our teachers there, right? So our costs have gone up, not down. So for them to cut funding this year would have been absolutely devastating to all districts across the state of Florida. So they were holding us harmless, but we're focused on next year.
As Jody clearly exemplifies, cooperation, teamwork, and respect were key to making this work. Nowhere is that more critical than the relationship between school administrators and the teachers' union. Fortunately, Sarasota, unlike many large urban markets, found common ground, putting students first. Do you think the school districts in Florida, like Sarasota, are being forced against their will in a potentially, or not a potentially, but in a dangerous situation? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think they were in the fall when school started. They were told they had to go back to school, they'd lose their funding, so they were. Now I think everybody's accepted it, and truthfully, I think they're counting up the days till the end of school. But yeah, they were told you will go to school, you will lock yourself in a room with 18 kids or more, during the day 180 in a high school, and you will social distance, which is impossible in a school because there's no room to social distance, and you will decide what to do to protect yourself the best you can, and so that's what happened.
Exactly. Many states also, including Florida, do not classify teachers like first responders. Let's talk about classifying. What should we be doing about that as to who gets the vaccination?
Well, our last president said we were, well, not first responders, but we were, what was the word they were using, that we were on the front line and we should be considered that, yes. And so it's kind of funny to me that now, for a while, we weren't included at the beginning. So I heard today, though, that the president's now saying all teachers by March 8th, it'll start being vaccinated in pharmacies, which is a little confusing. Of course, it's too early. So I'm not sure what's going to happen between the governor saying you have to be 50 and over,
right,
which is very confusing right now because we're waiting for information on that. And now the president's saying, well, maybe you can go to CVS and get it after March 8th, which is confusing. So I'm not sure. I don't care as long as they all get vaccinated. I don't care who's going to do it.
That's the bottom line for you.
Yes. Yes, I said I wrote the governor the other day when they were fighting in Manatee County over there. I said I'll come and get it, and I got nurses ready to go. Just give it to me. I'll drive up myself, put a refrigerator in the car.
Right.
So just give us
absolutely.
vaccine.
So what if what happens if a teacher refuses to come back to work without a vaccination?
Well, there's no requirement yet for any kind of
Not
vaccine
yet.
now, and I don't really expect there to be. I think they're going to leave it up to each individual person to decide whether they want to be vaccinated. Legally, I believe from what I've read, they could require that, but I don't think they will.
Can they take a leave of absence?
Yes, and really the school district's been wonderful. We have rules that you can't take it after March 1st, those kind of things, but for the last year, they put those aside, and anyone who wanted to take a leave, they let them take a leave.
What are the benefits of seniority?
On a leave? On anything?
Actually.
Well, I mean, for placement and that sort of thing, when people come back, their seniority will take them back to their school, and that sort of thing. But I think the problem is going to be, we had, I think, 80-something people take leaves, and already 40-something have said they're not going to come back. They're just going to stay, retire.
40?
Yeah, 40 out. That's 50% so far of the teachers. I believe it. They were teachers.
Yeah.
So that's scary because we already have a teacher shortage. I think we already have 100 openings for next year. We used to worry about, will we have openings for everyone, but now I'm worried, are we going to be able to fill our openings? And that's just an ongoing problem, and it's going to keep going, I think.
So maybe that begs the question, do you think teachers should be getting additional compensation for what they have to go through?
Well, I always think they should get more compensation anyways. But I mean, if you want to, I'm not sure with the funding in Florida there is any compensation left. But if there is compensation, yes, and I feel anybody who taught concurrently should get even more compensation. But the money this year that came from the state went to raise the beginning salary, which it did, and then the money left over went to 3% raises for everybody else. So that money's gone. So if somebody wants to give us some money, we'd be glad to do that sort of thing.
You know, I've always been concerned about our substitute teacher situation in the district. There's been a lot of you could talk about, because when teachers are out, how do we value substitute teachers? How are they involved in all this?
Well, they've been good about including them in the vaccinations when they did the 65 plus. And truthfully, we just don't have enough, because what happened was the majority, I'm sure, of our subs are retirees and are older, and I knew when it was going on at the beginning of the year and they were going to get their badges that many of them were saying, I'm going to go sign up and get my badge, but I'm not going to sub until I can get a vaccine. Right. So I think they're trickling back. I have a girlfriend who's retired, and she has had both of her shots, and she said, I'm going to start at Sarasota High, where she taught many years, next week, and start subbing and doing testing for them. So they're going to come back, but even with that, we never have enough subs. We just never do.
Yeah, this is a question that's of great interest to me. If a Sarasota County teacher is exposed at school, tests positive for COVID, does the current bargaining agreement define economic remedies for loss of life and or income?
Well, I don't know about loss of life, and we didn't cover that one. But what we negotiated this year, and the district was wonderful about it. The federal government gave you 10 days, COVID days, and that sunsetted at the end of December. So that if I was quarantined or if I was sick with COVID, and sometimes you're never sick with COVID, but you're quarantined 3 times. I have a music teacher at Laurel and Como, he's been home 3 times already. So you can get quarantined. So we had a few things we talked about. You got the first 10 days. So if you're quarantined, you get 10 days, won't come off your pay or anything. We negotiated an extra 10 days. And we did not sunset anything. So at the end of December, you still had your 20 days. Poor Manatee County, I was getting calls from them. They're sunsetted, and they didn't have the time. They didn't expand it. The other thing we're doing, and this was Mr. Dumas, who works for the school district, and we talked about it, and they need subs so badly, and there weren't enough subs, that any teacher who wanted to work from home, Zoom in, anything like that. I even have my music teacher who didn't have a computer because they didn't have enough to Zoom in. He's teaching on the telephone to the sub or the aide who's taking his class. So if you did any of those things, if you could teach it from home in any way, they didn't count it as a sick day. So my friend's probably been out 6 weeks total with all the times he's been quarantined, and none of it has come off his pay at all.
Final question here. How will the experience of this pandemic influence future collective bargaining, especially in terms of teachers' duties, their jurisdiction, and ultimately their job protection?
Well, we may have something in there that has to do with some sort of days. They won't be called COVID days, but they might be called something else. And truthfully, we might have something in there about concurrent teaching. That has been a nightmare.
Talk about that a little.
It's where the teacher will teach, say 8 kids show up, and 8 kids have chosen to stay home. So you've got 8 kids here and you've got 8 kids there. Here's a little camera, here's a computer, you can see their little faces, so I see the ones sitting at home. And it sounds so easy. I just talk to them here and they're watching me over there, and it's not, it's a nightmare. It's like creating lessons for two groups. They have to upload, they have to download. The kids can't download it or they can't upload it. I mean, especially in elementary schools. The kids will say, I'm going to the ladies' room, and then never come back. Or I've seen them, I was Zooming with a class in Venice High School, and one was still sitting in bed, one was eating breakfast. I mean, it may not hurt the learning, but it's just not like face-to-face learning. So if there's one thing I hope everybody's learned, you cannot replace teachers with a computer.
So true, Pat. That is a line to remember. And it has the distinct advantage of being true as well as memorable. Here is another truth. While there was much uncertainty about returning to school back in August, our local school board has been 100% supportive. Many people and organizations, including the Sarasota Classified Teachers Association, think that the Florida schools, like Sarasota County, are being forced to reopen in a very dangerous time. Should they be thinking that? What do you think?
Oh, I think we should be open now. In fact, 90% of our elementary students are in the classrooms, and I believe it's, in the 80% or more in the middle and high schools. We have seen, now we were nervous when we started, but we've seen, and we keep it on our dashboard, right on our website, how many students are out at any given time. And surprisingly, it isn't spreading in our schools. It was very difficult for our teachers who had to deal with, teaching kids concurrently. That means while they're online and some are online and then some are in the classroom. And that was difficult for some of them to navigate. Others took to it like, the duck to water, but others definitely had problems with that. And you have to remember, and that just all kinds of issues can come up, while they're at home, like, would he put his snake away? You're disturbing the rest of the class while you're playing with your pet.
Right.
Some things like that.
Well, it's interesting in on my next question about the impact, negative or positive, of staying home on the mental health and socialization, all those things that these kids want to do at that age. Is that a socioeconomic question, in that some homes, when you're doing virtual, who's home there? Other homes, it's very sophisticated. Maybe you have mom home who doesn't work and they have all the right equipment. How do you achieve parity in learning in that scenario?
We have tried to provide a device for every child that's at home, because you can't give one computer to a family when you've got to have, if there's 4 kids at home and all of them they have to sign on from, 8 to 3 or whatever time their school is in session. So they all have to have their own device. In some areas, especially down on Northport, there is no internet service. So those kinds of troubles that we've had to overcome.
I have a friend that works at NEA in Washington that has a son, and it's in Vienna, Virginia. The classrooms, they say there's a false equivalency for whether you have your kids in school or they're at home, because there isn't a lot of socialization at school. They have the chairs, you have to sit face front. There is no recess, there is no cafeteria. You eat at your desk. You don't get to see your friends because you're labeled, this child is number 2, he has to work with number 4.
Well,
it's all regimented. How is that?
Our kids do go to the lunchrooms. And my daughter teaches kindergarten, and she still has the kids come to the front of the classroom, and they sit. Now they're supposed to sit, they can't sit 6 feet apart, but they'll sit 2 to 3 feet apart. And you see that in some of the other classrooms. And I was there yesterday. I was reading with some of the kindergarten kids, and another kid will lean over and say the word that this one was having trouble with, or that, and so there definitely is, and otherwise they would never have been able to put faces with those names, and those are kids they're going to be going to school with for several years. So while we've had some problems, they're worried about, COVID. Well, what about the increase of children in homes, the increase of abuse, the increase of suicides, and some of those things? Those are things you have to worry about too. And that was something that was definitely part of the, the decision, when they were making it, not ours particular. We were told we had to open. We pushed it back, what was it, 2 or 3 weeks? So now the kids will be going into June school this year. And I think that extra couple of weeks helped. It was just preparing, And, like now we're waiting to find out if this bill passes the Congress for the new COVID relief, because this is going to supposedly give dollars directly to the school districts. And right now, I think the way it's formulated, I mean, about $70 million coming to Sarasota, and that is basically to help fund those extra costs, those extra, filters that we had to get and some of those other things we're going to have in the classroom, but also to help fix that learning gap that the kids might have undergone. And also for the counselors and other things that our children need now. We had a need before, but now we've got this whole new need of these kids who are finding issues. And I think when they all come back, I mean, we will be finding one by one all other issues that happened.
How many students have we lost? We see seemingly the enrollment growth trends for charter schools, private homeschooling. What's going on with that? Are we losing students because of the virus?
When you talk about losing students, it's like we're lost some of the ones that we expected to come.
Well, the missing,
you expected some of them. Our charter school enrollment has remained pretty static, but so has our number of charter schools.
Do you think vaccinating teachers should be more of a priority? Should they be classified like first responders? Where do you think they should be in all this?
Well, we just heard from the governor that I guess it's effective today. Teachers over 50 will be able to be vaccinated, and the bus drivers. And then now, I believe yesterday, President Biden said there's a priority for that. And I got a text as I was coming in here from our lobbyist. We talked to him yesterday saying, you need to come up with a way to allow us to get our teachers and our staff vaccinated, like what we did with the health department. We came in on one day and we went to the mall and we all got in there and we got our shots. And our staff helped and we were there. I said, because our teachers and our staff, we don't have that time, especially our bus drivers. Can you imagine them trying to be picking people up and they've got to be online at 6 a.m. to try to get in one of these lines to get the shots at Publix or something? I said, A, we can't do that, and B, we can't be told on Wednesday afternoon that we've got 200 teachers that can get the vaccine on Thursday morning. I said, where are we going to get the substitutes for these teachers?
So finally, you've been involved in politics as a legislator and in education for a long, long time. And you look at the impact of all this, the impact of the COVID. What do you look for? What do you hope and wish for over the next few years?
Well, I hope that we don't see, and we're looking at those numbers now, that we don't see this big learning gap where these children have lost. But we have done the tests. We do progress monitoring, and we've watched. And even though the time frames in between the ones is shorter than what we had done before, we look at those and see who's falling behind, why they're falling behind, and what we need to do to bring them back up. And we do. We have to look at every single child, every single classroom, and find where that needs to be and provide those services. And that's one of the things that we hope we'll be able to do with these federal dollars if they come down.
Shirley is correct. Federal and state financial support is critical. Now that President Biden's COVID bill has passed, educators across the nation are breathing a collective sigh of relief. But we end our conversation not with money, but on something infinitely more valuable: dedication, caring, and an enduring passion for helping our children. Thank you for joining me, Erica.
Thank you.
You're on the front lines. You have been teaching in the Sarasota County School District for 28 years.
Yes.
What is the hardest part for you after returning to school after the last year when this all began?
Not hugging the kids, not, having that, trying to avoid the closeness that we usually have. With the nature of my students, it's very difficult.
You teach special needs.
I teach special needs. Those kids are sitting in my lap. They're still crawling up, and it's what I do. So that's hard, where you have to try to keep them, keeping the desks at distances, keeping them behind their shields, wearing the masks that are very difficult for the students, for any kids, but for kids that have disabilities. It's very
Sure, and it works both ways because that's part of your teaching protocol.
Yeah.
That part of that is hugging.
Yeah,
And with
you know,
special needs.
they want
Yeah.
hugs, they want touching, they want, and so you know, it's trying at the beginning trying to do that, and finally saying, you know what, this is what I do. It's
So on that note, without compromising anyone's privacy, what has been one of the problems that maybe the kids have, the students have, that they are dealing with that you see from their perspective?
I think the masks have been huge, and I think my kids have done. I was shocked that all my kids came with masks, because I thought the parents would be getting waivers, and they didn't. They worked last summer with those kids wearing the masks, and by the time they came to school, they wear their masks. And I try to give them as many mask breaks, because we sit behind the shields, take your mask off and get a break. And you know, I think that's been a big thing, just, you know, having to wear that, because my kids all have speech problems.
Yeah.
So then you got the speech problem with the mask on, and you know, we're always going, what'd you say? What did you say?
Sure.
I just think, like I said, the distance, keeping the distance, the cleans. Okay, did you wash your hands? Did you use hand sanitizer? Spraying everything that they touch. You know, at first they're like, oh, don't do manipulatives. Everybody has to have their own thing. So it's like dividing up things, and things that I have in my room that they know we do. We haven't been able to do that this year because I don't have enough for everybody.
Sure.
So, you know, but we've found our way. We've had parents donate some stuff, and we just spray everything down. And I think that's everything. It's just keeping everything clean for those kids.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, what are the needs for these kids that you don't see? We're always looking for extra things for our classrooms.
It's been a much more expensive school year, I think, for us teachers. There was a lot of buying things that we usually don't buy, keeping things individualized. I don't have cubbies, so little bins that every kid has their own bin. And the shields, we didn't want the shields falling down, so buying the little stickers you put on the things to slide the stick, things that, you know, in August everybody's talking, and we're on these Facebook pages of teachers trying to figure out how to do this, and it was incredible, because you start, oh, I can get these on Amazon. And
Sure.
but it's been, you know, like you said, we spent a lot more, and we always spend a lot of money anyway, but this year it's been more just to be safe and to keep shields from falling down. And
You've been teaching full-time. You also have parents living with you. How do you do it all? How do you manage it all?
But just, you know, we've been very careful about when we come home, you know, we have hand sanitizer in the car, we have wipes in the car, keeping things clean. But really, and my husband's a teacher. He teaches at Tatum also.
Really? Oh.
And he teaches, he's a STEM lab. So every 6 days he sees 700 kids. So that was, our big concern was him seeing all those kids in a 6-day period. And my kids coming in and out, and I have kids that, you know, had immune compromise from having cancer and things like that. So making sure that, you know, the joke was that between Walker and I, we'd use up all our quarantine days, because, you know, the county and the state gave us so many quarantine days, and we haven't been quarantined once. And that was, you know, because last August it was like, oh, Erica, you're going to be quarantined all the time. Your kids are always going to be sick. We're going to have, and I haven't been yet.
All those assumptions. So, but have you seen any behavior or mental health challenges in any of the kids starting a year ago?
With the kids that were in school, no. Kids that were remote, you know, it's hard, and especially now that they've come back, because all my kids have come back to school. All my that were remote have come back, because it just doesn't work with, you know, the special needs kids. They need to be at school. They can't sit in front of a computer and be expected. But the kids at home, it was like there's no socialization. And the little kids, they thrive on socialization. I was just talking to a parent today that she said he's so much happier now that he's back at school. I said, yeah, because he can talk to everybody. You couldn't talk at school, at home. So I think that's the big thing, is that, you know, the kids that are at home, that's hard.
Of course.
The kids at school, at least they have each other, and they can, you know, play at recess, and they can, you know.
This question may not apply to you, but if you do see a student with symptoms in your classroom, do you feel that the Sarasota district has been effective at tracing?
Contact tracing?
Monitoring, yes, contact tracing.
I think they have. I think it's been to put our poor principal and our assistant principal are running around doing that. I think that's another thing they have to do on their job. And when I haven't had to have contact tracing in my room, but it happens in my husband's room all the time. And he goes, you know, they're running, measuring, and it's like, you know, we've been lucky at our school. We have not had any huge outbreaks. We've had quarantines, but we haven't had a lot of kids with COVID, and none of the contact tracings come back to school. We've had recess from the first week, I mean, it's a different recess. You know, the kids have to play out in the field. Of course, there's no football, there's no tackle, there's no.
Exactly.
And then you can only have one class on the actual playground equipment, but if you're on the playground equipment, you have to wear your mask outside, which, you know, in Florida heat, it's like, oh, who wants to? So the kids don't want to be on the playground equipment. But it's just, you know.
It's hard to think of it.
I see what they're doing up north, and I'm like, wow, you know, we've had a much more flexibility, I guess, with that down here, and we haven't had the, you know, and back in August, going back to school, everybody's like, oh, it's going to be a mess. Everybody's going to get sick. By the end of September, we'll be shutting down. They were waiting to shut. It hasn't happened. So, I mean, I think the school district did an outstanding job preparing. I really do. I will give them a lot of credit with getting the shields and you know, having the time, giving us that week to prepare, that extra planning week they gave teachers to prepare to get ready for this, because it was different. Because when we went into shutdown in March, there was, okay, here you go. Here's Zoom. None of us had ever heard of Zoom before.
How did, that's a great, how did people adapt to Zoom? Teachers?
I think they did much better. I think it was so hard. And I look at a real good friend of mine who, she was a quarter away from retiring. So she had her 30-some years in the district, and all of a sudden, you have to teach speech online. And it was like, I mean, she wasn't, you know, she wasn't a big tech person as it was. And so I'm going over to her house, we're getting it set up and trying to figure it out. And I mean, it just got thrown at us so fast, but we did it. And people said, oh, you didn't do, you know, we did a good job, we didn't do a good job. We did what we could do.
So finally, nearly half the states in the country do not consider teachers' top vaccination as a priority, like first responders and those over 65. That's changing as we speak, though.
Yes, it is.
I mean, it really is. Is it fair to demand teachers work without a vaccination?
Speaking for myself, I would have worked. There was no doubt. That was never a question. I wasn't coming back in the fall. And it wasn't even just financial. I was ready to come back to work.
Erica, it sounds like you really love your job.
I love my job.
What do you love most about it, especially now?
The kids. I always love the kids. I love what I do. If you leave me alone, don't come in, you know, there's all these changes. Get your reading endorsement. Take this. Just let us teach. I've taught reading. I've taught hundreds, if not thousands, of kids to read over the years. I had to worry about taking that reading test. But let me have my kids and let me teach. I know how to teach. I've done, you know, I know what to do. And there's things I want to learn, but at this time, we don't need those requirements.
Well, the district's lucky to have you. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
How about that, folks? Erica Franz, you are amazing. In closing, you're going to be hearing a lot of fancy consultant speak, like COVID slide, grade level gaps, and targeted remediation. This is part of our annual homage to testing and performance evaluation as a way to measure learning. The process is very stressful on teachers, on parents, and especially on children. Newsflash, we're in a pandemic. Kids are already stressed to the max. Parents have lost jobs, grandparents have died, kids are scared and isolated on computers. How about this? Eliminate standardized testing for the 2021 school year and give everybody, kids, teachers, and parents, an A+ for surviving COVID. If you would like more information on Sarasota County schools and how they are dealing with the pandemic, visit these links, and you can always watch this episode and all our past shows on my website, Facebook, and YouTube pages. Well, that wraps up another one. Hope you learned something and enjoyed the show. And until next time, I'm Suzanne Atwell. This is the Suzanne Atwell Show, and I'll see you around town.